Hello everybody, it's Skaaro the Red here again, and welcome back to Sunday Night Story Time with Skaaro the Red. If you're watching my Twitch stream, tonight we are having another installment in the ridiculous Ballad of Skaaro the Red, Chapter 9. Previously on Skaaro the Red, after the destruction of the pirate ship, the Golden Falcon, the Skaaro was set adrift in the Sea of Swords, where he came upon an island where he was captured by a tribe of cannibal gully dwarves. And tonight we are going to continue his adventure on the strange island of gully dwarves. And while we're doing this, we are going to do a little bit of adventuring here in Chult on Neverwinter Online. So sit back and enjoy the show.
Skaaro awoke to the odor of rotting flesh. Opening his eyes, his vision cleared, but instead of awakening in a tiny cage with Orvalo, Skaaro was alone on the floor of another tent. Skaaro tried to get up, but his hands and feet were bound tightly with ropes, preventing him from moving. As he rolled over and sat himself up, Skaaro discovered the source of the putrid smell. Seems old Toothless Pete's head was beginning to become quite rotten and was stinking up the entire tent. Despite the foul odor, Skaaro was for some reason relieved that he still had Pete's head. Then Skaaro remembered Orvalo had hidden some treasure from the Golden Falcon and hoped the old halfling was still alive somewhere. Growing impatient and needing some fresh air, Skaaro checked his beard, and sure enough, his little dagger was still concealed there. Luckily for him, gully dwarves were incredibly stupid and never bothered to search him. In fact, gully dwarves were so stupid that they were detested by normal dwarves, who at one point in history hunted them into near extinction. After cutting his bindings, Skaaro peeked outside. The village was bustling with muddy, naked little gully dwarves, busy running about, engaged in their typical village activities. Some of them wearing their strange, oversized masks and carrying spears. Outside his tent, 2 guards were posted, each armed with spears and shields. Skaaro went to the backside of the tent and cut a hole with his dagger, large enough to climb through. Then, snatching up Pete's head on a stick, Skaaro slipped through the hole and outside. Concealed behind the tent, Skaaro tied the dagger back into his beard and then proceeded to roll around in the muck until his entire body was covered in dirt. Satisfied with his disguise, Skaaro casually walked out from behind the tent into the village, holding Pete's head on a stick behind his back. Skaaro looked around for any signs of Orvalo. There had to be more than 30 tents in the village, and Skaaro had no idea which one they were in the night before. He would have to check them each one at a time, so Skaaro went door to door peeking into each tent. The first few tents were unoccupied and appeared to be simple living spaces, with primitive beds in boxes and other personal objects. From one of the larger nearby tents, he could hear chattering and giggling inside. Curious, he approached the door, and just as he was about to peek inside, a scruffy little gully dwarf child appeared in front of him. Skaaro looked inside and saw a dozen more young gully dwarf children running about and playing and babbling inside, with one adult gully dwarf who appeared to be supervising the chaos. The little boy dwarf just stood and smiled at Skaaro a moment, then babbled unintelligibly at him. Suddenly, Skaaro felt something wet on his leg. Looking down, the little brat was actually peeing on him. As he tinkled on Skaaro's leg, the little dwarf giggled with delight, and the rest of the children looked over and began laughing hysterically. Frustrated, Skaaro shook his head and huffed as he flung the tent flap down and stormed away to continue his search. Just then, he heard a terrible screaming. No! No! Oh! Certain it was Orvalo, Skaaro sprinted towards the agonized screaming and quickly identified the source tent. Skaaro pulled out his little dagger and he burst through the tent door. Just as he entered, chop, chop! Oh! The entire interior of the tent was soaked in blood, and a gully dwarf was busy butchering Orvalo alive with a Stone Age meat cleaver, which was little more than a sharp rock on a stick. Standing ready to battle, wielding his little dagger in one hand and Pete's head on a stick in the other, Skaaro prepared to lunge into battle. But the tribe's butcher completely ignored Skaaro and continued at his task. Chop, chop, splat! Orvalo's remaining arm came off, spraying blood across the room and directly into Skaaro's face. Ugh! Skaaro roared in repulsion as he wiped the blood from his face. As his vision cleared, a smiling little butcher stood before him, holding out a piece of Orvalo meat. The butcher said, "Gigum nom nom gee." Skaaro slapped the meat out of his hands and punched him directly into his belly, knocking the wind out of him. Staggering back, the little butcher's smile faded into an angry glare. The butcher raised his stone cleaver and charged at Skaaro. But before he could swing the stone blade down, Skaaro flung his little dagger directly into the butcher's eye. Injured, the butcher dropped his cleaver and stumbled back. Skaaro quickly charged at him, knocking him to the ground. Then Skaaro planted his foot on the butcher's chest, plucked his little dagger from his eye socket, and slashed the butcher's throat. Orvalo was a mess. Now both his arms were gone, and the remaining half a leg he had before was completely amputated. He was nothing more than a torso and a head laying on the butcher's block. Groaning in agony, he said, "Please, I'll give you all the treasure. Just get me out of here alive." Skaaro looked around for something to bandage Orvalo's stumps with. "Over here, on the other table," Orvalo instructed. "There's some paste and leaves they use to make the bleeding stop." Skaaro found the poultice and applied it to Orvalo's bloody stumps, then wrapped them in leaves and tied them on with some thin strips of leather. Orvalo did his best to stifle his screams while Skaaro bandaged his stumps. Skaaro again cut a hole in the back of this tent, then tied his dagger back into his beard. He picked up Orvalo and slipped out through the hole. Behind the butcher's tent, Skaaro peeked around the corners, looking for an escape route. As he peered around the corner, waiting for an opening, Skaaro felt a sharp tug on his long red beard. Looking down, he saw the little gully dwarf boy from the children's tent, standing at his feet and looking up at him with a big toothy grin. The boy babbled a little, but Skaaro didn't understand any of it. Then the child darted out into the village and started shouting, whistling, and pointing at him. Skaaro's cover was now completely blown, and countless muddy little gully dwarves began to converge on his location. As some of the masked tribal warriors emerged from the babbling crowd, they approached Skaaro rather calmly. They were not behaving aggressive or shouting. "Huku ding ding waka bobo da sapi si ki," one of the masked warriors said, as though trying to explain something. Confused, Skaaro just nodded and smiled. Some of the others continued their attempts to communicate, but Skaaro couldn't understand a word of it. Then the village shaman emerged from the crowd, still adorned in his large feather skull and an array of bone necklaces. The shaman approached Skaaro and held up his staff. The staff had a snake coiled around it, which, although unmoving, appeared to be alive nonetheless, and a desiccated human head impaled upon the top. The shaman chanted, "Kadinga dinga kaka boo" several times, and the face of the disembodied head began to writhe and twist. It made a sickening sound, "Ugh," as it slowly came to life. Then, looking at the undead head atop his staff, the shaman babbled in his native language a moment. When the shaman finished speaking, he cast his gaze back to Skaaro, and the head spoke. The shaman welcomes you to his village, and they are very glad to have found you. What in blazes are you talking about? They just drugged me and tied me up last night, said Skaaro. The head and the shaman babbled at each other a moment, and then the head spoke again. That was only to prevent you from harming anyone else before you understood. It seems that when you killed their chieftain in battle, you became the incumbent chieftain. Preposterous, Skaaro stated. You think I'm gullible enough to believe that, do you? Then, shifting his gaze to the shaman, I think your head is broken. It's talking nonsense. Bowing to Skaaro, the shaman again spoke in his gibberish language to the head, which in turn relayed the translation to Skaaro. He says that he is overjoyed you have accepted the honor of leading their tribe. They will begin preparations for the graced feast tonight, where you will undergo the trial of Kabuga. Wait now, I never accepted anything, Skaaro responded, but he was drowned out by the cheering of the crowd of gully dwarves. Then, as the crowd began to disperse and prepare for the great feast, the shaman drove his staff into the ground and gestured at Toothless Pete's decapitated head on a stick. Then, pinching his nose, he made a waving gesture, as though to point out the pungent odor. Holding out his hands, he seemed to be offering to take the head from Skaaro. Reluctantly, Skaaro handed over Pete's head on a stick, and the shaman again bowed to Skaaro. The head on the shaman's staff then began to say, Oh no, if you like your friend there, I wouldn't... Then, suddenly the shaman interrupted him. Kajinga-dinga-boo, he said, and then, with an agonized moan on its face, it again became frozen with a twisted expression, and it was once more inanimate. After the shaman and all the others had left to attend to their own tasks, 2 of the masked warriors remained. They bowed to Skaaro and babbled something unintelligible. Thumping their chests, they each took up positions on either side of them. Although Skaaro wasn't sure if they were to be his personal guards or his prison guards, they seemed harmless enough at the moment, so Skaaro decided to play along. Still carrying the bloody and moaning Orvalo, the guards led Skaaro to the largest tent in the village. Inside was a huge bed with 3 grinning female gully dwarves awaiting him. Although the gully dwarves were by no means attractive, even by dwarven standards, nonetheless, they tried winking and making suggestive hand gestures, and they were completely clean, not a speck of mud or filth on them. Even their hair was combed. Skaaro set Orvalo down in a chair in the corner, who, although was still in pain, smiled at the gully dwarf women. Oh, well, hello, my dears, he started to say, but was cut short when Skaaro threw a blanket over him. Oh, no, really now? Orvalo protested in a muffled voice. Then, turning to the 2 guards, who were also staring blankly at the women in the bed. Out with you now, Skaaro shooed them away, pushing them outside the tent. Then, turning to the gully dwarf women, Skaaro grinned and slid into the bed with them. Later that day, as evening approached, while Skaaro was relaxing in the bed with the 3 gully dwarf women, the shaman entered the tent. Holding out his staff, he again chanted his magic words, bringing the disembodied head back to life again. After it moaned and groaned back to life, the shaman spoke his gibberish language, and the head translated. Come, it is time for the trial of Kabuga to begin. The shaman then gestured outside, and Skaaro followed the shaman out to the center of the village. There was a large bonfire with a path of hot coals laid out in front of it. There was also a large crowd of gully dwarves. Since Skaaro was half pit fiend, the idea of walking along some hot coals didn't seem so bad. But just beyond the raging bonfire at the end of the path was a large painted war mask mounted upon a stand. "This way, please," said the head on the shaman's staff. Skaaro was directed to a small table which was set to the one side. On the table was 3 small cages. Inside the first cage was a small but highly poisonous white scorpion. Inside the second cage was a strange-looking frog. It was brightly colored, and it had several rows of razor-sharp fins along its back. The third cage, however, was empty, until the shaman approached it. As the shaman chanted in his unintelligible dialect, the snake which was coiled around his staff came to life and slithered off his staff and into the cage. While the gully dwarves began a rhythmic thumping on their primitive drums, the shaman proceeded to open the first 2 cages. Chanting in his bizarre tongue, he slid the cages together, and the frog immediately devoured the scorpion. The drums continued to beat ever faster, and the shaman continued to chant even faster as he opened the cage with the snake, which, quick as lightning, ate the frog. Skaaro had heard pirates tell tales of how some of the tribes in the southern regions would combine the poisons of several different species in this fashion to create a new poison for which there was no antidote. According to the legends, nobody has ever survived poison created in this fashion. Suddenly, the drums stopped, and the shaman began a different chant. As he babbled unintelligently gibberish, the snake again returned to the shaman's staff. Then, raising an ornate, engraved wooden cup to the snake, it opened its mouth and reared its fangs, and the deadly toxin dripped from the snake's fangs into the cup. The shaman added another liquid from a primitive jug. A strange, sparkling purple dust was sprinkled over the top, and Skaaro was given the cup, then directed to the beginning of the path with the burning coals. Although he was hesitant, Skaaro thought to himself that his pit fiend blood may be immune to such poisons, and, since the chief before him had become a chief somehow, it must be a survivable task. Then, with a deep breath, Skaaro drank the strange concoction and handed the cup back to the shaman. Suddenly the drums began beating intensely. The flames along the path of burning coals leapt up and began to take ghostly forms. Skaaro felt his vision blurring in and out, and everything around him began to twinkle and sparkle. Before he knew it, he was already walking along the path of flames. He was sure he could detect the odor of burning hair and flesh, but he felt no pain at all. As he walked further down the path, the flames began to leap up around him and form a tunnel of spinning flames, crackling and roaring. Ghastly faces swirled around in the tunnel of flames, moaning and shrieking at Skaaro as he continued further and further until he came to a wall of flames at the end. Within the wall of flames, the ghastly visage of the former chieftain appeared. Speaking no longer in the gibberish tongue of the gully dwarves, the chieftain said, "Yea, Skaaro, ye hath bested me in combat, and have proven yourself worthy to lead our great tribe. Before you pass, you must now swear to protect the tribe and uphold our traditions, or be cursed by the great Kabuga for all time." "Fine, fine," Skaaro agreed. "I'll protect the tribe and all that, or face the curse of Kabugi." Then the face of the chieftain drifted back into the flames, and the wall of fire opened, revealing the ornately carved and brightly painted mask of the chieftain. Skaaro stepped out of the path of fire and through the opening, lifting the mask from its stand, and Skaaro placed it upon his face. The crowd of gully dwarves cheered loudly, jumping and dancing, beating the drums, shouting and whistling. Following the trial of Kabuga, a great feast had been prepared. The tribe's new chieftain, Skaaro, was given a seat at the head of the long table, which was covered in various foods. The now limbless Orvalo was also carried out and placed in a seat beside Skaaro. Then the shaman came out and returned the now desiccated head of Toothless Pete, still impaled on a stick, but no longer stinking of putrid rotting flesh. Skaaro was delighted to see him. "You look much better, and you smell better now too," he said to Pete's inanimate, decapitated head while holding him up proudly. Then the shaman chanted again in his strange language and blew a handful of the purple sparkling dust into Toothless Pete's face. Pete's expression twisted and writhed, and he began making a low moaning noise. "Oh, oh, oh." After a few seconds, the moan grew to a full-blown screaming. "Oh, oh." "It's going to take a little while to get used to the pain," the decapitated head on the shaman's staff explained to Skaaro. After a short while, the screaming subsided, and he finally spoke. "Oh, it hurts. Why would you do this to me?" asked Toothless Pete. But Skaaro was at a loss for words. All he could say was, "Well, I sort of found your head, and one thing led to another, and all in all, I'm just kind of glad to see you now, mate." But Pete continued to complain. "It feels like someone rammed a spike through my skull. This is terrible and cruel thing to do. Can someone make me dead again, please?" Skaaro looked down at the shaman, who just smiled and bowed at Chief Skaaro, and then took his place at the table. Next, one of the warrior gully dwarves brought the steel short sword, which was wielded by the previous chieftain, and presented it to Skaaro. Skaaro accepted the sword. "Hurrah!" he shouted, and raised it high in the air. Skaaro was then presented with a large plate with the biggest helpings of fresh vegetables and the best slices of cooked meat. The gathered crowd of gully dwarves cheered and clapped excitedly. Then the entire crowd rushed the table, frantically grabbing food and stuffing their faces. Skaaro hadn't eaten in days and was extremely hungry, but as he was about to dig in and looking down at the meat, he suddenly realized where it may have come from. Skaaro looked over at the dismembered torso of Orvalo sitting next to him, who was being hand-fed by the children. "Oh, go ahead, it's okay," Orvalo said. "Are you sure?" Skaaro asked. "It's not like we could stitch it back on now, and you'll need your strength to get us out of here," Orvalo replied. Skaaro dug into the meal, savoring every bit of Orvalo meat. You're actually quite tasty, you know," Skaaro said to Orvalo, who replied, "Sadly, I do know. It's true. I think someone might have fed a wee bit of me to myself." Meanwhile, the decapitated and now undead head of Toothless Pete on a stick continued to moan and scream in agony, begging to be killed. Some of the dwarves brought out jugs of some sort of alcoholic drink they had probably brewed themselves, which tasted awful but packed quite a punch. Orvalo and Skaaro entertained the tribe by singing old pirate songs they had sung from the good old days on the Golden Falcon. And after quite some time of screaming, even Toothless Pete's undead head joined in on the singing. The entire tribe ate and drank well through the night, celebrating their new chief.
And that's it for Chapter 9 of the ridiculous Ballad of Skaaro the Red. It seems that the tribe of cannibal gully dwarves have elected Skaaro to be their new chieftain, which was an interesting turn of events. If you're enjoying our stories, please hit the up votes, the likes, the subscribes, all that stuff. Retweet, repost, or whatever. Share it with your friends if you know anybody that you think can enjoy this kind of material. And if anything else, just let me know that you're enjoying it, and to keep going. I'm on Twitch, I'm on SoundCloud, on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. I'm Skaaro the Red, and I look forward to joining you next Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on my Twitch channel, where I live stream these ridiculous stories, and we'll be continuing next week, and I hope to see you then. Thank you for watching, and have a good night.